Okay, we're back again, the Unfiltered Family Therapists. We are talking today about the characteristics of healthy parenting. We'll talk about some of the parenting styles or parenting training um, models that we like, and some of the things that we see and how we address them in our practices. So, what comes to mind first for you, Jen?
Well, I think about healthy parenting. I think about parents that can evolve with their kids. Every time they go through a developmental phase, the parents can easily transition with the kids. It's the parents that, have had their own childhood trauma, that are emotionally stunted themselves, that have a hard time. Like, once those kids pass the age where they were traumatized, it's almost like they have no idea how to parent. They have no idea how to set boundaries. They have no idea how to use their voice or to say, hey, I'm the parent. And then what happens
I
is you end up with children that are like parentified, adultified. You end up with children who are off running amok. Um, and I really think that you have kids that are, parents who are pushing their kids to do sports. That's one of the best things that they can do when you have emotionally stunted children, because there you get the structures, you get the boundaries, you get the discipline.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree with you. And I think, one of the ways that I look at it too is that, um, you know, parents often get forgotten about as people that are also going through phases of life. You're an infant, a toddler, an elementary school student, a college student. But, when you have kids, you also are a parent of an infant and a parent of a toddler and a parent of a college student. And so those are all phases that change with for parents as well. And then, they go off to college and empty nester, and then you're dealing with old age. There's always phases for adults too. And so being respectful of it's a phase for everybody. The
yes,
to adjust through that. And I absolutely agree. You do have to evolve with them and make adjustments. But I think the biggest part of that, the healthiest part of parenting, is understanding you didn't give birth to half mom, half dad. You gave
yes,
birth to somebody that has genetic makeup from generations before you. And as soon
yes.
as their senses are formed, they start interpreting the world the way they receive it, which has nothing to do with the way mom and dad receive it. And they do become a totally different human. They're not just parent kids to a parent. They're human beings.
With free
And
will.
yes, they have their own drive to self-actualize,
Yes,
design their life the way they'd like it to be. And so much about parenting is fear-based.
yes,
And your job is to ensure their survival. So a lot of that is very brain-based too, right? That's why a parent's brain evolves, males and females, during pregnancy, so that you
yes.
have the ability to ensure the survival of this little human. But eventually they can absolutely make their own sandwiches and, do things for themselves and design their lives. And most people want that ability to not just be stuck in a box.
Yes. Well, and I believe too that, when we have children, a lot of, parents have a hard time with, I think like 2 to 5, right? Because kids are like nonstop. They're like have their own voice now. They're talking back. They're being sassy.
Mhm.
They don't want to wear what you put the clothes that you put them on. They're like 2 and 3 years old. So I have so many parents that I work with that I always tell them, I'm like, kids pushing boundaries are doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're designed to push boundaries. They're designed to like try to
That's
figure
where they
out
find where the boundary is. They cross it.
exactly. Exactly. And,
Uh,
I always tell parents, I'm like, a kid hitting you at the age of, 1, 2, 3 is completely normal. They don't have that impulse control. Their brain has only been, on this land for 3 years, 2 years.
mhm.
So I tell them, I'm like, never hit back, never treat aggression with aggression, because you just get more aggression.
Yeah,
Kids need to be redirected, not hurt, not
yeah.
punished. And
Yeah.
I know it's controversial. A lot of parents still believe in spanking,
Sure.
but I believe that we're trying to raise human beings that are
Yeah.
eventually going to leave our house and go off into the world. We want to make sure that we raise kids that turn into adults with good self-esteem,
Yeah.
good confidence, that aren't people pleasers, that can say what they need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I use the example of a Shark Tank where, if you're trying to teach your kids something, and, I think it's also important to address that a kid's brain is not designed like a parent's brain. A parent's brain is like a bundle of orange extension cords that have all the insulation around them. So their networks are solid and they're fast. And a kid's brain is more like a bundle of wires without the insulation. So their signals do get crossed, and they're not fast signals because they're getting energy transmitted to other networks in the brain.
Yes.
And so an adult may be trying to teach a kid something very simple, but if you're yelling at them or you're hitting them, what happens in the brain is the same exact thing that would happen if a bear chased them. If a
Mm-hmm.
bear is chasing a person, adrenaline and cortisol go up in the body. And what happens is blood flow, oxygen flow go to survival needs, heart rate,
Blood
breathing,
pressure.
balance, digestion, blood pressure, everything that you need in order to survive. And what they can see in brain scans is under a threat, this front problem solving creative part of the brain actually gets physically constricted, and
Yes.
problem solving stops. Your body just uses what's wired into it before that. And
Yep.
so you're trying to teach your kids something really simple, and you're like, don't throw the fucking ball. And it's really like putting them in a shark tank. So if you're floating in a perfect temperature pool of water, and I say to you, do this simple math, 3 + 4 + 6, you can do that. But if you're floating in a shark tank and I say to you, do this simple math, 3 + 4 + 6,
You're
you
going to say,
can't
who
hear
the
the,
fuck cares?
yeah, you're going to say, I can't hear the numbers, let alone be able to put them together. So what you
Yeah.
do is you teach your kid to avoid problems instead of understand problems. And so
Yes.
you end up with somebody that avoids talking to that person that yells or hits, and then it becomes generalized to anybody
Well,
else. Like,
and they're in
I'm
a constant
afraid of
state
that
of
person.
fight, flight, or freeze. And then
Yes,
when the left
that's
side of the
exactly
brain
what it
goes
is.
offline, not only is it problem solving, but it's communication,
Yep.
it's words, it's trying to find your way out of a paper bag is
Yes.
impossible.
You
And I
don't need to know how
tell
to do basket weaving to run from a bear. It's
exactly. And I
yeah,
tell the parents that I work with that, their brain is fully developed as a parent. You've been on this earth for 40 years, 30 years, whatever. These kids have only been on the earth for 3, 4, 5, 6, 13 years, right?
right,
And their brain, their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed till we're 25.
right.
So trying to teach people in the state dependent learning, right? We learn best or we remember best, the recall is the best in the state that we learned it, right?
Right.
So if you're constantly in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, and you're trying to teach your kid by using intimidation or anger or aggression, they're not going to remember anything. They're just going to be shut down and wanting to get away from it or go towards
Yes.
it and beat the fuck out of it.
Yep. They learn
Yeah.
to avoid instead of
Yeah.
understand.
And I tell my
Absolutely.
parents, I'm like, how do you know that you're in a space to be able to talk to your kids in that moment and to correct or to
Yeah.
connect? You have to connect first. I tell them, can you do simple math problems? Because if you cannot do simple math problems, this is not the time to be having a conversation with your
Absolutely.
spouse, with your partner, with your child, with
Yep.
anybody.
Everybody
Yeah.
has to get out of the shark tank. If you want somebody to
Yes,
understand you, don't put them in a shark tank. You have to help them
exactly.
get out. So yeah, when a kid is throwing a fit, so many parents want to reason with them and try to
Oh,
talk
you
them
can't
into
use
calming
reason
down.
and logic. Yes,
Yeah,
that's so
they don't
crazy.
even have that ability. That part of their
Yeah.
brain is
If
shut
you
down.
had a pot of water that was boiling on the stove, would you go up to it and be like, calm down, stop boiling? No,
Yeah.
you would turn the temperature down, you'd put a lid on it,
Hmm.
right? And do
Yes,
that.
I love
But
that
the more you
analogy.
talk to it, what happens? The more it
Right,
boils over and you're getting
right.
nothing accomplished.
Yep,
So I tell my
exactly.
parents that I work with, you have to connect first. I don't care what your kids said or did or what they're doing. Get on the floor with them, be non threatening, connect. I'm here for you. You're safe.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
here. Let's
And
breathe.
even if you have a kid that is like, I don't want to talk to you right now, let them take some time, because really
Yes.
they're your goal is to teach them it's not my job to calm you down, it's yours, but you have to use what skills work for their brain. All kids are not the same.
Exactly.
So yeah, sometimes a kid doesn't want to be talked to in that moment. Sometimes they want to be left alone. So give them a safe
Yeah.
place to be left
Yeah.
alone.
Or I always say to the parents, if the kid doesn't want to go somewhere, you leave, go to your room, go to the bathroom, go somewhere. If the situation is safe,
Yeah.
go and you check out and you calm down. You're not
Yeah.
going away just to like go away and forget about it. You're going away to actively do things that calm your central nervous system down.
Absolutely. And
Yeah,
that's
you
not
cannot.
neglect. That's healthy parenting.
Yes, you have to be able to connect before you correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if they're not in a safe place, then yeah, tap out. Get somebody else to come in and take over for a little bit while you tap out and calm down regulate yourself so that you can give them that
Yes.
that
Yeah.
experience
Get
they
out of
need.
monkey brain. That goes with
Yes.
anything, anytime that you're in monkey brain. And when I say monkey brain, it's anytime that you're in fight, flight, or freeze and you lose the ability to like think about things in a like logical,
You're just
equal.
basically talking monkey.
Yeah. And what happens when you argue with the monkey? They throw shit at you, right?
Right.
And then when what happens is you throw shit back, and then they throw shit back, and you're in a full blown shit storm, and you have no idea what the shit even is.
Yeah,
So stop throwing
absolutely.
shit is the first thing I always say.
That's funny.
Disengage.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah,
you saying that before. I like it.
yeah,
Yeah.
But even with
Well,
teenagers, they kids and teenagers know how to like hit that Achilles tendon to really get you. They
yeah,
know your weak spots. They know how to like tear you apart. They know how to like keep
yeah.
themselves safe.
And that's just animalistic learning. If I'm training a rat to push the lever every 5 minutes, I don't have control over the rat. I only have control over my response to the rat. And as long as my response is predictable, that rat can push the lever at the 5 minute mark because its dopamine system picks up on a pattern. I didn't teach the rat how to tell time. I worked with that animal's brain. When we're
Right.
working with our kids, that automatic conditioning that comes from intentional parenting or mindless parenting still has some pattern that your kids pick up on, and they play a role. That's how they learn our buttons, because our brains are designed to pick up on patterns. So we always have
Right.
to look first at what are my patterns, because if my pattern's really predictable, they're responding to a predictable pattern, and you can only
Yeah.
recondition a rat to have a predictable response
Yep.
by being predictable in training them.
Yep. And
So,
I always tell people too, even in the unpredictableness, there's still predictability. You can always predict
yes.
that someone's going to be unpredictable.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even chaos is predictable.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is. Well,
Well, and
and
and that's sorry. That's why there is our token podcast fruit fly. There it is.
let's name him. Let's give him a little identity for our people
Dick.
out there.
His name is Dick.
Dick.
Dick for short. Richard. um. Now I forgot what I was going to say.
We're talking about predictability and the chaos.
Yeah, even oh yeah. So even chaos is predictable. So if I want to train a rat to push the lever every 5 minutes, but I also reward them by giving them food at 1 minute, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, what I'm doing is creating a chaotic schedule. And what you get is a variable response, which is a rat that pushes the button more often.
Right. Like
Right.
when we're gambling.
Yep, absolutely. We're like rats.
Yep.
And so if we don't look first at our own conditioning of the animals in our lives, and not even a derogatory term, but human beings are animals, if we don't have awareness of our ability, our only ability to control ourselves, then we don't
Yes.
change any of the conditioning. We just blame others for being unreasonable, being problematic. So, I may have somebody bring their 15-year-old kid in to see me because he doesn't clean his room. And I could do 12 sessions with him trying to figure out how to solve a problem he's already solved, because I'll ask him, has your room ever been clean? Yeah. How did it get clean? Mom did it. So he's already solved the problem. So I could.
He's learned, right?
Yes,
Yep.
it's just a predictable pattern. There's nothing conscious about it. Just like a rat didn't learn how to tell time. So I could do 12 sessions, waste those parents' time and money, or I go to mom and say, what do we do to get you to stop cleaning his room?
That's normally what I do
And
is I
get on
ask the
some middle
parents to
ground
come in first because
always.
usually it's not a kid problem, it's a parenting problem. I have to tell you a
Almost
quick
pretty
story.
much
My
always.
son, who's 15, every night I tell him to make his lunch, before he goes to bed. And he's like, "Oops, I'm tired. I have to go to sleep." And he'll like
Um,
go to bed at like 7:30 just so he doesn't have to make his lunch. I don't know why, just a
right.
sandwich. And like this morning, I made it again and I looked at him. I said, "Damn, you have me conditioned pretty well. You've learned that if you don't make your lunch, somebody will make it for you."
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Everybody, our brains like predictability because predictability gives us the illusion of safety,
Yep.
and our brain likes that. So everyone has predictable patterns. It's just
Yep.
a matter of
Well, he's got us
understanding
figured
that.
out that he knows that I'm going to make his lunch
Yep,
for him.
we're
So I
all
told him, I said,
conditioning
now
each
I'm going to
other.
start conditioning you so that when you don't make your lunch and you're hungry by 2 o'clock in the afternoon,
Oh
you'll be
yeah.
like, damn, I better make my lunch.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We had the same problem with one of our boys. He would always forget his basketball shoes or his track shoes. And my husband is, Lonnie is all about sports. So he would drop everything, take him his shoes, drop everything, take him his shoes, like day after day. And one day I said, Lonnie, you have to let him go without shoes today.
Natural
And
consequences.
yeah, and man, I thought Lonnie was going to cry. This was harder on him than it was
Oh,
on our son. And he did. And he ended up having to do practice in his school shoes. And he was not happy about that. But he did not ever forget his shoes again.
see, all
And
it takes is
it's,
one, right? One
uh,
big giant statement and they learn
yeah,
very quickly.
yeah. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be humiliating or torture, but it does have to be uncomfortable. It doesn't
Yes.
doesn't need to be a beating. It just needs to be uncomfortable for the
Yeah.
kid. And
See,
even just a little bit of discomfort.
I came from a family that, you figured it out. You had to walk home if you didn't have a ride.
Mhm.
You had to like figure everything out. There was no one helping you. Nobody, and we didn't have a car. We were very poor. So if we didn't have our stuff for school, or we missed the bus, we were screwed. So I
Oh,
learned, and my mom also used violence to get us to do what she wanted us to do.
gotcha.
My son, he's high functioning on the spectrum, very high functioning. You wouldn't know that he is. He just has these little quirks. But when he was little, he must have been like 4 years old. I took him and the neighborhood boys. We were going to go to the trampoline place to go bounce. And the minute his friends came in the door, he was acting like an idiot. He was just pushing like the boundaries really bad. We went to Target. He's knocking things off the shelf. And I told him, one more time and you will not jump. And he's like, looked at me and he knocked it over. And I'm like, okay, didn't
Yeah.
make any reaction or anything. We get to the bounce house. I paid for 4 of his friends to bounce for 2 hours and made him sit there and watch.
Oh
And
God.
that boy screamed and cried for the whole 2 hours.
Yeah.
I promise I'll be better. I'm like, nope, if I give in, you will not learn a lesson here. So
Yep.
now to this day at 15, all I have to say is, remember the trampoline place?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I say nobody gets out of life, out of childhood without baggage. It's still our job to
Yes.
unpack it. So, you know, parents become so uncomfortable about the idea that their kids are going to be mad at them or they're going to fuck them up somehow. And I just tell them, you're going to fuck up your kid and they're going to be mad at you. It's not
Yes.
going to be that you intend to do it. If you raise your kid being comfortable all the time, you teach them to only tolerate things that are comfortable. And when they become uncomfortable, then their behavior is designed to
Oh,
pull somebody else into a
the
predictable
their
pattern.
poor spouse when they get older is going to be like, what happened here? How did I get hoodwinked?
Yes. Yes. So
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of people, if you're afraid of your kid being uncomfortable, you're going to make life more uncomfortable for them when they're off on their own because that is how life is. But
Yes.
it doesn't have to be so extremely uncomfortable. There just has to be a level of tolerance that they have to sustain. And they have to be able to be in unpredictable environments so that their brain is wired for how to handle that when they're off on their own.
Exactly.
So yeah, sometimes you have to sit there and scream and throw a fit, and parents have to know it doesn't mean I don't love you. It doesn't mean I don't care. It means I have to establish this understanding for you so that you know where the lines
Yeah. I love you so much that it's more uncomfortable for me to listen to you cry than it is for you to cry and watch your people jumping.
are.
You know, the movie Hope Floats at the very end, she says, Mama says that adulthood is what we spend trying to get over childhood, which is so true. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
childhood is like this big, and we spend the rest of our lives trying to get over
Yeah.
what happened during
Yeah.
childhood.
Learning how to
Yeah.
unpack our baggage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the problem is that we have two people who get together. And I tell people when they come in for premarital counseling, I'm like, I want you guys to sit. We're going to talk about what was your family like? What was your family like? What were all the red flags? What was all the bullshit that you didn't like? Well, how are we going to come forward? Get rid of that shit to be able to now have your own family, your own rules, your own
Yes.
expectations for parenting, your own, you're on the same page together. And then I do it again when they have kids. Okay, so now we're in this phase where your kid is this age. Where how much is your childhood impacting your ability to parent right now? How
Yeah.
much of your parenting is other people's voices,
Absolutely.
other people's actions? You know, how
And
much of other people's trauma
yeah.
are you carrying around that's affecting your ability to parent?
Yeah. And you're in that situation as a kid and you leave that environment with two separate realities. And then
Yep.
you come together and those realities are not the same. You have to find that integration so that there's
Yes.
space for two people. And when your wife is asking you a question, you have to be careful not to respond to her like a shitty teenager to your mom who's asking you a question because she's not your mom.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
but it happens automatically. It's not even we have to get rid of this idea in society that what people do is so intentional because very little of what we do is intentional. Most of what we do is mindless. And if you
Yeah.
think about the day you learned how to drive, you're taking your driving test and you're looking left and looking right, thinking about the turn signal and the brakes. And, remember how overwhelming that was to be in that very conscious, intentional space. But now you drive from one town to another, never think about the pedals, never think
You're on
about the turn
autopilot.
signal. Yes. And most of what we do is autopilot. And it is a matter of bringing it back into that conscious, intentional space so that your brain goes,
Yes.
okay, I want to do this differently now. Otherwise,
Yes.
you just do it mindlessly. Nobody sucks on purpose. Your parents never tried to fuck you
Well,
up.
and your kids aren't trying to hurt you. Your kids aren't
Yeah,
trying to be assholes. They're not
yeah,
intentionally, that's
they
part of
don't
being,
know.
childhood is the perception that your kid is an asshole because everything they're
Yeah,
doing is about them learning, being curious, all those things. And if we are out there with the expectation that everyone is trying to hurt us, parenting is going to suck hardcore.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, the majority of neural connections in our brain are made in 3-year-olds. 3-year-olds have the most neurons that they'll ever have at any point in their life. So when you think about that and you understand the majority of the wiring is in our brains today was created when we were kids before we knew shit about how the world works. And that's what helps build that insulation around those wires. You stop looking at your kid like they're a fucking idiot
Right.
and you give them time to have practice. It's actually experience that builds that insulation. So you have to let your kids make mistakes. You have to let them make the mistake more than once and make adjustments. And that's what makes them good at problem solving. So, when we get rid of this idea of people are intentionally trying to hurt me, you start to understand that what everyone is doing is for themselves, not for or against anyone else. And I use this example to explain that. Most of us know that holding the door open for somebody is a polite thing to do. Well, you hold the door, somebody comes through, you hold the door, so you got a little bit of dopamine because you feel like that's the polite
Mm-hmm.
thing to do. The person behind you produces their own dopamine because life just got easier for them. Well, and so what you were doing was for yourself. You produced your own dopamine. They just benefited from it because they interpret it that way as well. Now, if somebody comes behind you that you don't like and you slam the door in their face, their brain probably drops dopamine because they're like, that sucks. That wasn't nice. But your dopamine level goes up because you're like, I hated that. And so you get a
Right.
little reward for it. And so what you're doing is for yourself, but the disadvantage is to that person.
Yes.
So
Yep.
understanding that everything we do is for ourselves, not for or against anyone else. We can stop saying you're intentionally doing this instead of understanding what can we do differently? What what would make it easier for you to learn to hold the door for me?
Yep.
And you know, how are you interpreting me that makes you want to shut the door in front of me, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And our chemistry is affected by our own interpretations of the world. Everyone
Yes.
else's chemistry is affected. When two people fall in love, they're not injecting each other with dopamine and oxytocin and endorphins. It's how they're interpreting one another. And
Right.
when that derails, it's also because the interpretation has changed. Not what that person was doing against you, but how you interpreted their actions. Same
Exactly.
with our kids. If you interpret that what they're doing is against you, that they're idiots, that they're intentionally doing something against you, you're not understanding their brain and how it actually works. They're just in self-preservation mode like everybody else
Yeah.
on the
Well,
planet.
you think about birth, right? When we give birth to a baby, the oxytocin is so strong, right? It gives us that natural, like, attraction to our child. So that as
Yeah.
women that we can protect and, we can sit there and because babies are hard.
Yeah.
This little
It is
tiny
work.
thing comes into your life
Yeah.
and disrupts your whole routine. So
Yeah.
the oxytocin helps us, keep our baby alive and keep our connection.
Yeah.
But what happens as our kids get older, we don't have that oxytocin hit like we did when they were born.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the days are long. Your kids are, especially if, kids are staying at home with you. It's monotonous. It's boring. You lose your sense of self. You lose
Yeah.
your ability to like feel like can have an adult conversation sometimes.
Yeah.
And you really get lost in that.
Yeah.
And if sometimes I tell people, parenting can be soul sucking if you let it. You
Oh,
have to
yeah.
maintain those boundaries. You have to have healthy balance, no matter what, and a lot of times, parents feel guilty that, oh, I don't want to leave my child or I'm not there for them. But there has to be a balance where you're not
Yeah.
only just dad, you're also a husband and neighbor and this. Not only are you mom, you're a woman, you're a friend.
Yeah.
But we lose that so quickly. And,
Yeah.
being a parent, you have to be
Yeah.
selfless. You really do. And we find so many parents out there, you see it on the news all the time where, they lock their kids in a cage or they, put them in the backseat of the car so they could go to the strip bar.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
you have to be able to, you know, be
Which is
able to
their
put
trauma.
those right, their own trauma, right? Because what happens with children is I always say that if you have unhealed childhood trauma, what is the fastest thing that will bring it up is birth.
Yeah.
Birth will bring up that unhealed trauma because now all of a sudden you're powerless, you're helpless, there's no manual.
Yep. And if
You're
you
just kind
don't
of
unpack it, somebody else is going to carry it for you. And it's going to be your kids or your
exactly.
partners.
Exactly. And especially if you
Mhm.
have birth trauma, like the birth doesn't go the way that you want it to go.
Yeah.
You're like sitting there and there's something like happens medically. Oftentimes, if we've had any kind of trauma, as women, vaginal our vagina is the place that we feel that trauma a lot of the times.
Right.
And exactly when we give birth, what happens is we have people watching. We have like a
Yeah.
whole room full of people, right? And
Yeah.
they take the baby away. No one's really paying attention to you. It's now the baby.
Yeah. So
So,
alone in a
yeah.
moment when everybody's around and you're alone.
Yeah, other
Yeah.
cultures, other countries take care of their moms, for the first 6 months after the baby is born. We're expected to be superwoman. The
Yeah.
man goes back to work. We have to go back to work within 6 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And we are feeling like we have to be superwoman and we're tired. We are drained. We have nothing left to give anything, except even, we're the last one to get anything left from our own bucket.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that
Yeah.
can continue. If that's how you feel the first couple of years, that feeling can continue well into like teenagehood.
Yeah.
If you don't get yourself balanced and get that trauma healed,
Yeah.
what
Well, and
happens?
going back to oxytocin, think of oxytocin this way. When a woman is in labor, oxytocin helps ensure that the uterus is contracting, but it's also part of the reason that women's senses become so overwhelmed, especially in the last stage of labor, is because that oxytocin is increasing. But it's not just squeezing the uterus, it's also enhancing all of her senses. And there's this great
Yes.
study, I don't remember who it was. And I learned about it when I was a childbirth educator. You can, when a woman gives birth, her senses are so enhanced that she can hold her baby for 5 minutes, and they take that baby out, blindfold the mother, and bring that baby back in with 10 other babies, and she can pick out her own baby in
Wow.
that amount of time. And so when that stage of delivery is interrupted, you can miss out on a lot of that connection. And then that leads into,
Yes.
not, how you struggle getting up at night, and, the motivations that you need to ensure their survival. And a lot of times birth trauma is not accounted for in
Yes.
somebody's parenting. That is something that should always be assessed when there's
Yes.
parenting struggles. What was birth like?
When we think about that attachment, right? If you have birth trauma and say that baby's whisked away or you're whisked away or something does interfere with that, what happens
Yes.
is that now that attachment is interfered with.
Yes,
And I was
absolutely.
I was really upset with it. I talked to a psychiatrist here. I don't want to say the name, but she's like, "Oh, well, that doesn't affect attachment at all." And I'm like, "I beg to differ. You
Yeah.
take a child away for a day or two from their mom, a couple hours, and that is
Yes.
a huge interrupter to that baby.
Yeah.
The studies show that their brain changes,
Yeah.
when they're taken away from their caregiver. It doesn't mean if it doesn't matter if it's, 2 hours, 2 days. There is, when there is a big giant chunk of change, and when I say that, like a couple hours, there is an impact on that attachment.
Absolutely. And
Because what
it's,
happens with our oxytocin? Our baby's whisked away, the oxytocin drops.
yep.
The oxytocin, it helps us with like pain management, right? It helps us with
Yep.
attachment and connection. It
Yep.
helps us manage so many different things.
Yep.
So now you have that baby. That's why they're always talking about like, having that, baby
Those first
rooming.
few minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, baby rooming in there, that first few minutes, right?
Yeah.
But like my son, he was whisked away for 7 hours because he had his shoulder was dislocated, and the cord was wrapped around his neck. So they
Right.
whisked him away for 7 hours. And when they brought him back, that kid would not stop crying. I could do
Yeah.
nothing. And from that moment forward, he never stopped crying.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think that also says even more why mental health um, clinicians need to be educated about things like neuroscience, neurotransmitter, hormones,
Yes.
because all of those do have a role in how somebody functions, what genes are expressed in their body, and what
Yes.
capabilities they have because of that. This is neuroplasticity. You
Yes.
know, you can't change the brain if you don't know how to work with it instead of against it. So
Yes.
I think that's just even more
Well, and I feel like
weight for
pediatricians and OBGYNs aren't trauma informed enough. I
absolutely.
think that really needs to be something that we start with at birth is, how is your trauma? What is your
Yes.
trauma? How is it going to affect your parenting?
Yeah.
Let's get you some help. Let's get you the support that you need. Because a lot of people don't have that support.
Yeah.
They're sent home with a baby and, there's just, no one's there to take care of
See
them.
you
Yeah,
in
see
two
you
months at
later.
their checkup.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I
And
know as a
we'll
military
babysit you
family,
at 2 months and 4 months and see how you're
yeah, but
doing.
nobody's checking on you within like
Yeah.
3 days, a
Yeah.
week,
Where's
right?
my checkup?
Exactly. Yeah. So I know as a military family, I didn't have a lot of help. I was living in Guam and Hawaii, and my family was in Wisconsin, and
Yeah.
nobody came out to help me. So
Yeah.
I had to like figure it out. And there's so many military families out there,
Yeah. It's the same.
oil field worker families, so many other families that have these things against them that, the mom is left by herself.
Yeah. I was in Yokosuka, Japan, mostly by myself in a house
Yes.
off base.
Oh
So
gosh.
yeah, it was work.
Yeah.
And yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't have any visitors. And then with my second daughter, we were in Washington, and he was on shore duty, but still he wasn't there all the time.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you do need support. Most of our support was friends. So we did have friends to rely on each
Yeah.
other.
I feel like when you have a successful parenting, you have a good, healthy tribe.
Yeah.
People who are looking out the village, right? Like old school village. We don't
Well,
have the village anymore.
and I had very emotionally unavailable parents. So the friends that I connected with I didn't get some of the greatest examples of parenting from them, but
Right.
that's all I had. So, I learned some really unhealthy ways of parenting. And fortunately, becoming a childcare provider, I learned a lot. And that helped me really adjust, because that's what I did when my kids were younger so that I could be with them. And the parenting program that I learned was 1, 2, 3 Magic Parenting. And I still advocate for it today because
Oh, me too.
that's my favorite because it doesn't teach you how to control your kid. It teaches you how to control your own behavior
Yourself.
so that
Yes.
you create a predictable environment for your kids.
Yes.
Your kids know
Yes.
what to
It's not
expect.
about giving them a timeout. It's giving yourself a timeout,
Yes.
right? You're
Yeah.
not counting three for them. You're counting three for yourself to be
Yeah.
able to like calm yourself down.
Absolutely.
The other one I love too is Parenting with Love and Logic. And there's another one that's called How to Talk to Your Kids So Your Kids Will Listen and
Mm-hmm.
Listen So Your Kids Will Talk. And
Okay.
basically, it's
Yeah.
just being
I've
silly with
read
your
that.
kid. When they're in the
Mm-hmm.
back seat and they're like, oh my God, I'm hungry, and they're starting to throw a fit, you start to say things like, if we had this magic button and we pressed it, what kind of food would show up? So we're taking that, we're not being angry, we're not
You're not like,
responding.
shut up, we'll get there when we get there.
Exactly. We're making it playful and fun. And basically, we're controlling ourselves.
Yeah.
We're not letting them make us upset. We're not letting
Yeah.
ourselves get upset to the point where
Yeah.
we're telling them, everybody shut up and we're never going to get food again. I'm just going to keep
Yeah.
driving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean all parents don't eventually get there. Like, get the fuck off my last nerve. But it is a matter of recognizing that and doing something more effective than putting
Yes.
them in a shark tank and then asking them to understand what the hell you're
Yeah.
saying.
Well, and you think about too, right? If you wake up at the day yelling at your kids, if you have the kids go to sleep and you're yelling at your kids, what happens? They wake up in a bad mood. The bad mood continues. You're all
Oh
yelling.
yeah.
And they go into school in a bad mood, come
Oh
home.
yeah.
It just continues, right? Because how can
Yeah.
you sleep calmly when you just got out of a shark tank?
Yeah.
Think of all that
Yeah.
adrenaline that
It
runs.
takes it takes 20 minutes on average if you're doing nothing to get that adrenaline and cortisol out of your body so that you're back to a regular state again. But when it comes to those emotions, human beings are different than animals in that our so much of our trauma and stress and anxiety is meaning based.
Yes.
So we can leave, if a deer gets chased by a bear, gets away from the bear, just goes back to eating. But a human being gets chased by a bear, they may not eat for days, and they sit there and think, what did I do to cause that? What do I do to prevent that from
Right.
happening again? And our emotional stress keeps us in that constant position of we think about it, adrenaline and cortisol. Think about it again, adrenaline and cortisol. So we
Yes.
keep ourselves there instead of getting ourselves back to down regulation, which is when
Yes.
adrenaline and cortisol go down. Yeah, and there's lots of ways you can
Yeah.
help that happen. Breathing exercises in general,
Exercises, yoga. Yeah.
meditation, changing your focus. Just go to your favorite vacation in your mind. Even for two
Yes.
minutes, you can raise dopamine, which raises adrenaline or lowers adrenaline
Yes.
and cortisol. But
Yeah.
if we don't do that, if we're not able to change our focus, our focus just stays right there in fight, flight, freeze. So we have to get ourselves out of it and then come back to it when we're out of the shark tank versus
Exactly.
just believe that, our emotion becomes our mood and our mood is just fucked up.
Yeah. Remember, in codependency, right? The feature of codependency, one of the biggest features is we're always in a shark tank, right? And your mood is affecting your child's mood is affecting yours, your husband's in a mood. Everybody is meshed like this,
Yeah.
right? When we are out of the shark tank, other people can be in the shark tank and we can be interdependent, where we're like, you can be in a mood and it's not going to affect me. And if you have a teenager, you know exactly what I'm talking about,
Oh
right?
yeah.
They're always in a funk, they're always in a mood,
Yeah.
something's always going on. And if we sat there as parents and got sucked into that,
Yeah.
think about that feeling in your house, how shitty
Yeah.
that would feel.
Yeah. We had a blended family with 7 kids,
That's a
and
lot of kids.
absolutely those kids had mood and they bled into each other and
Yeah.
parents. But just like you talked about having fun with them, we played around a lot. We were goofy. We We made rules that no other families had, like you could drink out of the milk jug when you're 13, because that's when backwashing stops. And
I love that.
yeah,
Oh,
you could cuss at home. You're not allowed to do it with your friends. You're not allowed to do it with your grandparents. Or if you piss me off with it, you're going to lose the privilege. Like we let them
yes.
have a lot of freedoms, you know, because we didn't want our kids to have meaning about everything and constantly be in that shark tank instead of, no, all of that stuff that everyone says you have to do. If you're being kind, if you're being good to yourself, it's okay to break some of those social
Yeah.
norms.
I think it's all that matters, right? As long as you are being, a good person, a kind person, a
Yeah.
compassionate person, you have good self-esteem, you have good confidence. That's really what
Yeah.
we're looking for, right?
Yeah.
So, as kids, little kids, we are so in helicopter mode, right? With little kids, we want to make sure they don't get hurt or they don't
Yeah.
fall, right? But all of a sudden they become teenagers and they don't want us in their business. They
Yeah.
want us to be like potted plants. They know we're there if
I,
we need them.
I was thinking about that today, and I can't remember who said that's what teenagers want. They just want a parent to sit in the room like a potted plant. They can come over and sniff your flowers whenever they need it, but they don't
Yes.
want you growing into their
They
business.
want to come to you,
Yeah.
and then when they want to be watered, they tell us.
Yep.
Yeah, when they want the
But you
attention,
have
they
to be
tell
able to
us.
listen.
Yes, and then when it's done, it's done. They don't want to keep going, right? Because sometimes
Yep.
it'll be a brief 3-minute interaction that is such, you're planting seeds, right? We're just planting
Yeah.
seeds. But
Yeah.
all of a sudden they kind of come to us as a potted plant. We're like, oh my God, yes, come, come, come. And then we push it too far and then we lose that. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, whatever, mom.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
remember it was probably, I don't know, I think my oldest was probably uh, just getting into high school. And, we go, you know, have some drinks with friends, and, the kids would be up when we got home, and I'd be excited to talk to them. But, a couple beers, and I could take that conversation way too far.
Oh, yeah.
And then they'd be like, oh, I hope mom's not having beer. Because I became more than a house plant, and I had to learn not to have those
Yeah.
conversations with them, because I was excited for them
Yeah.
to open up to me, but that
Yep.
wasn't the right mindset.
We have to learn
do.
to evolve, right? To
Yeah, that was,
to go and be super involved with our kids' life and then be that house plant and know when to back off.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And if they hadn't have said anything to Lonnie, he wouldn't have said anything to me.
Right.
So that's how I learned, because their kids do have an interest in your happiness.
They
Kids
do.
protect parents as much as parents protect kids. So
Yes.
if you don't have those boundaries and honor their space as well, then they'll just cut the boundary off.
Exactly.
They'll just cut off. So you have to accept influence from your kids as well, because
Yep.
it's their life too.
Exactly.
They're not just your kid.
And
They are a
sometimes
human
you get the
being.
biggest, you can have a small little interaction and get the biggest amount of connection that you could ever imagine. My
Yeah.
18-year-old daughter just told me last week, she's like, Mom, you're not just a mom, you're a woman too. And I was like,
Nice.
oh, yeah, it's so wise for being 18.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Right.
And it's great. When I always say it's hardest to be parents to adult kids, because at that point
Yes.
you have zero leverage, especially if you raise them to leave and you're not paying the bills. You have
Yeah.
zero leverage, and they are designing their own life the way they want it to be, and it may not be the way you want it to be. So being
Exactly.
a parent to an adult kid is
It's
tough,
hard.
because you
It's a
have
whole
to.
nother evolution, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think sometimes my adult kids, and they're all adults now, but I think they all struggle a little bit with wanting me to be there, and because the adults in my life were just in my business all the time, and my
Yeah.
mom's mom was that way, just in her business all the time. I didn't want to be that parent that's just hovering and helicoptering over everything
Yes.
they do. So I'm kind of a distant adult parent, but every minute I get to hang out with them. I love hanging out with them. They're the funnest people on the planet.
Aw.
But I don't call them all the time, because I don't want to be that hovering parent. And I remember
Yeah.
I was having lunch with my youngest daughter one day, and I explained that to her, and she said, "Yeah, Mom, you should call more." I'm like, oh, okay. But I
Yeah.
didn't generalize it to everybody. I did talk
Yes.
to her.
You have to, everyone's like specific for
They're all
themselves, right?
different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So apparently I
Well,
need to have
this,
that conversation with all my
yeah.
adult kids.
Well, I love this conversation that we had. I think next
Yeah.
week we need to continue it.
Good. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
do that. We'll
Yeah.
keep going. We'll evolve.
We'll evolve with whatever's going on. Yes.
Yeah.
We'll be like the potted
Um,
plants that evolve. So I just
yeah.
want to tell
So if
everyone
you're
out
watching,
there,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Nope,
Yeah, I just
you
want to tell
go.
everyone out there, just remember, be curious. Sometimes, we have to check ourselves to figure out when we think there's a problem with something, we have to check ourselves and ask ourselves, what are our expectations? What's not being met here? How old am I feeling emotionally? Because I tell you, when we have kids, sometimes they will make us feel like we are little kids, and they'll bring up shame a lot in ourselves because we're thinking we're not doing it right. So we have to make sure that we check ourselves, because oftentimes the problem isn't the child, it's us.
Yeah.
And there's no
Yeah.
shame in that. We're all figuring it out as we
Absolutely.
go.
Nobody sucks on purpose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're watching this, feel free to reach out with questions. At some point we're going to have interviewees. So if you're interested in something like that, reach out. We're happy to start moving in that direction. We love your feedback, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Be great this week, guys. Be your best.